Hi, Pastor Steve here in beautiful Visalia, California at the Methodist Church. Welcome to Forgiveness Equals Freedom podcast, a podcast where we teach the various steps of freedom, of forgiveness, which leads to spiritual freedom, and talk about forgiveness in general. Today, I want to relate a story to you that I have carried with me most of my life, and it has become more significant as I've leaned into the practice of forgiveness. It's a story that you might be familiar with. A lady named Corrie ten Boom in World War II. Her family harbored Jewish fugitives, and they were caught, and she was sent with her family to a prisoner of war camp or an internment camp by the Nazis. And her story that she wrote after the end of the war when they were released was the story that I think can generally be said to be a story about her experience of being a Christian in a horrific environment in which she and other people were constantly abused up to the point of death. So she wrote her story about learning to see the beauty even in the misery of the internment camp, and she wrote her story about God speaking to her or urging her to encourage other people and to spread kindness, even in kind of a savage world where sometimes people fought and harmed each other over food, those kind of things. Really, really powerful story. In her story, Corrie ten Boom talks about forgiveness also during her internment and also after her release, the importance of forgiveness. And then later in her life, after the publishing of that book and I think a couple other books, she relates the story of giving a talk about her book, sharing her experiences, taking questions from the audience, that kind of thing. She went on a world tour extensively in the United States and throughout Europe also. And she relates the story that after she gave a presentation one time about her experiences and about having grown closer to God and really discovering what it means to have God in the darkest of hours, and also um, uh, in the telling of the story, she talks about feeling like God wanted her to forgive her captors, the people who had tortured her and harmed her, and people that she loved, including taking some of their lives. So she gave this talk and she answered questions, and then afterwards, people came up to shake her hand and get books autographed, that kind of things. And one of the people who came up, and she saw him before he got to her, was one of the guards at the camp. And this guard had specifically been cruel to her and to her sister. And it's fascinating to me. Corrie ten Boom describes her internal dialogue at seeing the Nazi guard who had harmed her sister a great deal and harmed her also, and who was known to be savage and cruel. She said that when she saw him, she came to realize, or she realized that she still hated him. And in modern language that wasn't available to Corrie ten Boom, we would say the sight of her tormentor and torturer triggered her, and she had a flashback. So her emotional life went right back to where she had been when she had been in prison. And when she saw this man, it was always bad news. And she reported that she began to tremble, and internally she did not want him to come to the front of the line because she was shaking people's hands, again, signing books or doing other things. And so she was in an immediate panic mode. And if you're watching this channel, chances are that you have had a similar experience where your tormentor or torturer has come into a situation where you weren't expecting to see them. And so you know what it means to be triggered and to go into kind of flashback mode. So the guard comes up and he offers his hand and asks her if she remembers him. She doesn't know whether he's playing games or whether he is there to be contrite and to apologize. Um, but his hand is out, and the offer for a handshake is hers to accept or to refuse. And she slows the action down in that part of the telling of the story and reveals that she didn't want to shake his hand. Right? It isn't that her heart was strangely warmed or that she was so thorough and perfect in forgiveness that she just wanted to embrace him and make all the bad go away. She hated the man, despised him for what he had done, and she hadn't come to a point where she had to deal with that yet. The fascinating part of that story to me is that she went ahead and shook the man's hand. And this is the lesson for today. She shook the man's hand not because she wanted to forgive him, not because she felt any gladness or grace or mercy towards him, but because she knew it's what God would want her to do. And so when she shook his hand, then he came undone, right? It melted him, and he apologized. And the thing plays out. You can look up Corrie ten Boom online. It's anything that she's written or anything that you see online about her is well worth watching and reading. Her story is amazing, and she is a very earnest and honest Christian. So I tell you that story related to you because it's been a part of my practice of Christianity since then, although certainly poorly. But there are a lot of things in life that Christians are asked to do by God, right, through the writings of Scripture, but also through the bidding of the Holy Spirit, the nudge that God puts in our souls. And many of them we don't want to do. It can be everything from abstinence from extramarital sex, or not using intoxicating drugs or alcohol to a point that it would cause you to act in ways that were non-Christian. Any number of things call for us to override what we desire or what the world tells us is good, and to override if for no other reason than simple obedience to what we know is the will of God. That's a really powerful component of that story. And again, I've used it in lots of different ways in my life. My makeup is I am really fiercely loyal to people who have proven themselves to be loyal to me, or who have proven that they love me. And that loyalty comes from a kind of an ongoing lifetime conversation with God, where I fail very frequently, but I always try to default to, if I know that it's right, then I ask God to help me do it. So as that pertains to forgiveness, the lesson is simple intellectually, but very, very difficult emotionally. One of the reasons that we should try to learn to forgive, and that we should literally practice forgiveness, is because it's God's will. He makes it abundantly clear. There are at least 15 to 20 scriptures in which Jesus and some of the apostles who wrote insist that forgiveness sits at the core of our faith. And they further insist that God wants us to forgive because if we do not forgive others, we cannot receive forgiveness. So there's almost a mathematical equation. We receive the grace of God at the depth that we give the grace of God to others. Of course, there are exceptions, and you can talk about the thief on the cross didn't have time to do that, but his final act was mercy towards Jesus, who he didn't know who was. So in forgiveness, when we balk at it and don't want to do it, it's worth remembering, look, this is not a thing where you have to feel the emotion and feel happy about it. It's a thing where God is God and we're not. And so sometimes we just dig in and do what's right, shake the guard's hand, decide to practice the 4 steps of forgiveness in a situation where we don't want to forgive the person, or where we're still pretty sore and roughed up by them. Obedience brings a great deal of benefit in our relationship with God. As practicing Christians in the world, it makes a good witness to other people. It's an important thing. Let me give one last it tickles me, illustration of this. So in our church here in Visalia, I do the forgiveness series every year during the season of Lent, and that's gone on for about 15 years. And I received a critique or a criticism. Someone sent word this year that they weren't coming to church during the forgiveness series because they were sick of it. I said the same thing every year, which deserved to be reckoned with and thought about by me. And so here is my thought on that. It is a little bit hilarious. The Bible only has about, 9 or 10 great themes. So preachers say the same thing over and over and over again, just using different illustrations and different stories. And forgiveness, for me, in my opinion, sits at the heart of the gospel. So I talk about it all the time, not just during the forgiveness series. But a couple of things. I'm not teaching the same things on forgiveness that I would have 15 years ago. 15 years ago, I was broken, really just a shell of myself inside, and I was devastated by having carried grudges and hatred inside of me for so long. And so when I first preached the forgiveness series, it wasn't something that I knew about from experience. It was something that I was doing real time. So in those first 2 or 3 years, more or less, I was researching how does one actually forgive? What does it mean? What does it look like inside? The stuff we talk about on this podcast. And those sermons reflect that quest and a sharing of what I am finding experts or supposed experts on forgiveness, what they say and what they practice. And I'm also reporting a little bit what effect it had on me in the first stages of learning to forgive. Now, these 15 years later, having really so benefited from practicing forgiveness and beginning to, for lack of better words, get better at it. Not only better at it, but more willing to go into forgiveness mode. Because I know what awaits on the other side when the work is done, peace can be restored and your heart is opened up. What I preach is still the steps of forgiveness, but what I talk about in each step is so radically different than it was 15 years ago. It's night and day. It's like almost a wholly different subject. So I do preach the same series, the steps of forgiveness, every year, but the content and the knowledge, as well as the passion that I feel and I hope I bring to those sermons, radically different year after year after year. The second thing, and here's the point of telling that story. When I thought about it, and I really do try when people criticize me or when they complain about stuff, I try to get past the flashback thing and to think what's going on here, right? So I take seriously what people say. And in this instance, here's what I think I really hear. I think what I hear is, look, tell Pastor Steve, I'm not going to listen to this nonsense anymore. I decided 15 years ago, I don't want to forgive. I don't believe in it. I don't think it's going to do me any good. And he doesn't know how badly people have hurt me. So I don't want to go in and listen to stuff that I have no interest in and I'm not going to commit to. Here's the deal with that. If the topic of forgiveness in a church sermon, year after year after year at the same time of year, so angers anybody that they say, I'm not going to go listen to that nonsense, that tells you a whole lot more about the spiritual estate of the person than it does about the content of the sermon. If you make up your mind, forgiveness is not the way for me, I'm going to go through this life attempting to get back at people or seething and holding grudges inside or trying to avoid all the bad people, good luck with any of those things, right? If you make the decision, I'm not committing to this, well, then it's all going to be nonsense to you, and you wouldn't listen to it one time off, let alone a year after year after year. If you're in that place where you say, he's got nothing to say, I'm not going to listen, it likely tells you that you are beginning to reap the reward of refusal to forgive. For the topic of forgiveness, earnestly talked about in a church, to be enough for a person to say, I'm not even going to go, right? Because he's not saying anything different this year, or he only talks about the same stuff all the time. Wow, that seems like a hard estate, and I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry that anybody would say, I don't want to hear any more about forgiveness effectively. It's a bunch of nonsense. I want to get on to other stuff. Really, the truth is, for me, since the heart and soul of the gospel is the forgiveness of God through Jesus, making available to us the ability to, in our obedience, become forgiven at an ever more deeper and precious level. Forgiveness is the only subject. There are, again, 9 or 10 great themes in Christianity, but all of them eventually come back to forgiveness. So I'm going to just keep preaching forgiveness and talking about it on this podcast and trying to share with people who are interested and I guess sometimes who aren't interested, because when you get to the other side of the equation, when you shake the guard's hand, when you're obedient and you just do what God has told you to do as earnestly as you can, even if you don't want to, even in that situation, you are rewarded in amazing ways, and the temperature and the tenor and the feel of life changes drastically. So Today, in this first post-Easter message, what I would say to anybody who listens to this podcast is look, I know it's hard. Everybody who sincerely pursues forgiveness and talks about it or teaches about it, we understand it is very hard. You have to swallow a bunch of stuff and really reorient your life. The promise is not that it's going to be easy. The promise is that it's more than worth the effort. The reward is so very astounding and great that all of the effort you put into it will seem like really almost nothing once you begin to taste the fruit of faithfulness and obedience to God. So this week, think about making the commitment, right? You're going to go back and maybe look at the previous podcast that outlined the steps, and you're going to shake that guard's hand, right? You're going to be obedient and pursue the thing, even if you're not feeling it. You're going to diligently do what needs to be done in each step, and you're going to try as fully as it's possible for you to try. You can't know what the truth is just intellectually. The truth, right, reveals itself through the state of the person's being. And if you pursue forgiveness, even when you don't want to, if you're obedient to the clear commandment of God in that way, and you use these steps we've talked about, boy, your life will get better. It really will. It's an amazing and beautiful thing. So I want that for anybody who tunes into this podcast. I want you to know what it is that we're talking about, the spiritual reality that results from that faithfulness. Be obedient, be faithful. Ask God to help you as you begin to walk the steps of forgiveness and plug your story or stories into those steps and work them in the way that we've been instructed. I'll keep talking about forgiveness because it keeps rewarding me in ways that for most of my life, I just didn't imagine were even possible. It's a glorious spring day here in beautiful Visalia, California, and that's the outside weather. Internally, it's a beautiful day, having celebrated the resurrection of Christ and the fulfillment of God's promise of forgiveness and restoration to us. I hope that in your life, in your internal life, it's also beautiful. And I know it will be beautiful if you make the decision to be obedient and begin the process. God bless you. Don't forget to hit like, leave comments, write questions if you have. Be happy to respond to any of them. Alrighty. Take care. See you next week.